thank everybody for coming today. First of all, I'd like to say thank you to the Mayor and Mayoress for attending, and I'm sorry that you had to decline all the things, but the 7th of October is quite popular. What I will do is invite you up to have your speech.
Rosalind and all the other members of ACES Bridlington Club and Friends by the Sea, thank you so much for inviting us to join with you in the celebration of your first year anniversary. It is an honour to be invited as Mayor and Mayoress to your first exhibition, and we are looking forward to participating in your day. Your charity fulfills a vital and unique role in our community, being the first Afro-Caribbean and South American charity in the area, and I'm proud to support you today. So thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Excuse me, as you've heard, my name's Glenn Parsons. I'm a barrister. I work on what's called the North Eastern Circuit, which is a geographical circuit that stretches from South Yorkshire, Sheffield, up to the North East. I live in Leeds. I put this together with the help of Mike Seaman, who stands here, who's not just a great photographer, but also an archivist. I know that this area of history is one that he specialises in, as he's helped me collate a lot of the photographs that I'm going to show you today. And I've entitled my talk to you today, Invisible Soldiers, Forgotten Sacrifice. We're all familiar with this image of the Windrush, but I'm afraid I have a problem with what I call the Windrush narrative. Yeah. It's used as a false line in the sand, and it is used to convey in a shorthand two things. Generally, people think that there were no black people in this country before 1948, when this ship docked at Tilbury, 22nd of June 1948. And it's also said, when this image is shown, well, here are the people from the Caribbean coming over to this country, helping Britain reconstruct after the war. And of course, totally missing out the vital contribution that thousands of people from the Caribbean had made to the war effort years before. So I'm afraid it's a great shame that the history that I'm about to show you is not shown or taught in schools. My own children didn't know this until I showed them pictures of their own relatives in military uniforms, and they were amazed and said to me, well, Dad, did black people fight in the war? Well, they did, not just in the Second World War, but in the First World War also. And there were well-established communities of black people, certainly in Cardiff in the late 19th century. These certainly documented in 1818, Cardiff and Liverpool, are very well-established black communities, and this is actually photographs from Mike's own personal archive. This lady here is Mike's grandmother. This is Cardiff in the 1930s, and this is the same lady married, we think, in the 1940s. So there were already well-established communities in this country. But of course then came the Second World War, and I'm just going to give a very slight and brief history lesson here, and forgive me if you already know this. But of course, Britain declared war on Germany in September 1939. But by June 1940, Hitler had cut a swathe right across Europe, and in fact on the 22nd of June 1940, France had surrendered, and the Germans were only 26 miles away across the English Channel. Pleas were sent out to America to join the war. They were refusing, and in fact did not join the war until December 1941, after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. So make no mistake about it, Britain was in a really perilous position here, as it was, facing the Nazi peril, who could see, of course, on a clear day, you can see the White Cliffs of Dover from France. So the call went out to the colonies. This is an article we found from 1942. There were ones earlier than that. This is in the Gleaner, which is the main paper for Jamaica. Come to the motherland was what I bet was being said. Come and help us win the war. and all sorts of promises were made. Promises such as, if you do come, we'll train you all to be pilots. If you do come, you will be able to settle here. And if you do come and decide to go home, you will go home as heroes, and we'll perhaps come back to what happened to those promises in due course. But these are two adverts that were placed asking people to call up, particularly for the RAF. Not only did the islands of the Caribbean send men, but they also sent money and aircraft, and again that's something that's never recorded in history. Jamaica, I know, sent £60,000, which of course a phenomenal amount of money for small islands, and this was long before established tourism. These were people who worked as farmers. There was some mineral wealth, a lot of it being shipped out to America. Jamaica had a lot of bauxite, which is used to make aluminium, but a lot of that wealth was transferred out of the country, so very poor nations. All the islands put forward money to buy ordnance and to buy planes. But the men from the Caribbean came and they reported for duty. We're not quite sure whether this is Hunmanby Station or Filey Station. They joined up, the West Indian Volunteers as they were called, joining the RAF. They came in very significant numbers. It's thought that over 6,000 came to these shores between 1940 and 1944. And when you think about the Empire Windrush, there were between 500 and 800, actually nobody's entirely sure exactly how many people were on that first voyage, but it's between 500 and 800 people from the Caribbean. But prior to that there'd been over 6,000 that had come, and incredibly 4,000 of them were stationed at what became known as RAF Hunmanby Moor. It started off as a Butlins holiday camp. It was part built at the time and was commandeered by the RAF, and it was no holiday, I think we can basically say. The facilities, incomplete at the time, were basic by any nature. You can imagine what it must have been like for people who come from the Caribbean on the East Coast in winter, facing basic training. And this gentleman here on the right hand side, Alfred Gardner, was one of the ones who came over, and his story really runs through the whole story of the war and of Windrush, but we'll come back to him. Alfred's also here on the right hand side there. That's my uncle there, my Uncle Gil. He came across, that's him resplendent in his Jamaican military police uniform, which he joined after the war, before then coming back to this country. And my other uncle there, Uncle Edwin, Lucky, they call it, Edwin Samuels, came over here. And these men were volunteers. They didn't have to come. They were volunteers, and they came, and they were very, very proud to do so, and proud to help out. And this is perhaps one of my favourite pictures, really. Happy-go-lucky lads from the West Indies. Maybe not a PC title we use today, but it does reflect, doesn't it, what we see in this picture. This was taken in June 1944 at Reeton Chapel. And it is a picture, is it not, of multiculturalism? We've heard a lot about that this week, whether it's working or not, but there they are. And it really accords with what my uncles said when they came over here, about the very warm welcome that they received, about visits to the vicar, tea with the vicar, organised games of cricket, and all the locals rallying round and being supportive, wanted to integrate, wanted to learn, unlike some of the American regiments, which were distinctly segregated. No segregation whatsoever. My uncle said we went to public houses, there were Americans in there who said, well, you shouldn't be letting them in here. And the Americans were told, you're out, we don't have that here. you go out. And that's how it was. And it's a testament, I think, to the welcome of the people of Filey that they gave to these servicemen who came in such large numbers. And you can imagine that the population of Filey at the time was only in the low thousands. And there they were, just outside the city of Hummonby, for those who didn't know, only 2 or 3 miles, I think, is it, Mike? I mean, you can see from Filey the Butlins camp, and there they were, 4,000 people from the Caribbean, the Royal recruits doing their basic training. And this gentleman here, the Right Honourable Oliver Stanley, who was at the time the Minister for the Colonies, not a role that we have now. Very, very few were actually trained as pilots. And of those that were, they had the heaviest casualties, and indeed it's often said that the black regiments suffered the worst casualties. I'm not saying there's any particular agenda there, but it says that of all those that came, a third were killed and never went home. Many died in basic training, and there are graves in Harrogate, the cemetery in Harrogate, of servicemen, some as young as 17. And it's also right to observe that some of the people who came probably did lie about their age and weren't old enough to sign up in the first place. But there are, unfortunately, those graves of very young servicemen, teenagers, who never went home, and probably their families were never able to visit those graves or really find out in a great detail whatever happened to their young children. Very sad. But here they are, proud, as you can see the pride with which they wore their uniforms and served the mother country. And there is again Oliver Stanley passing out parade. And there are the photographs of the integrated regiments in which they served in. Everybody standing and fighting and living, and sometimes sadly dying, shoulder to shoulder. And I can do no better than to quote the words of Air Chief Marshal Sir Sholto Douglas, the first Baron Douglas of Kirtleside as he became. But he said in 1942 of the Caribbean contingent, "You rallied promptly to our side and the cause for which we stood, determined with us to defeat those powers which would destroy civilization and plunge the world into barbarism." So there can be no doubt about how pivotal and important the contribution was from the Caribbean soldiers, how they helped turn the tide of the war in favour of the Allies. And thankfully, in 1945 VE Day, the war in Europe finally came to an end. But what became of the soldiers? Well, how many of those promises do you think were kept? Well, in short, the story of the Caribbean soldiers was simply erased, completely and utterly, from the history books. Their big contribution to the war effort became invisible. Very few had been trained up as pilots. Almost all were sent home. And could you believe the vast majority were denied their medals? And I'll come back to that. But how can it be right that none of this ever is talked about, learned in school on the curriculum? They became entirely invisible. Many of them came back on the Windrush, and that's again another aspect of this. Many of the people who came on the Windrush in 1948 had already been here as serving soldiers, and my uncle, one of them, he wasn't on the Windrush, but he came after that and was able to say, well, yes, let's go back and help, because we had such a warm welcome when we came the first time. Sadly, the welcome wasn't quite as warm when they came the second time as the years progressed. And indeed, another story that's not told about the Windrush is that there were attempts in high government to stop it actually landing when it was realised that there was an open door policy inviting potentially thousands of people from the colonies to come and settle here. there were, it was revealed only a few years ago, communiques in the highest part of government wondering if they could stop the ship from actually landing. Of course, it was too late. But I got thinking about this in lockdown when we all had time on our hands. You know, Judge Wilson was practicing his drums. I had time to think about my family, do a bit of family tree research. We all had time on our hands to sort of, for the first time in years, just reflect on things. One of the things I started thinking was, well, my own family tree. And I got to wondering, well, is there anything in Filey? I presume there's plaques all over the place in Filey to this part of history. And I made some inquiries at the local historian. There's a Filey museum, there's a Filey library. I spoke to Filey council, and there is absolutely nothing at all. And I said, well, in actual fact, I'd like to see if we could put together a plaque or something like that. Would you be interested in that? I was told, no, we wouldn't. We're not interested in it at all. I said, well, I can fund it, and the barristers of the North Eastern Circuit will fund it. It will not cost you a penny. And I went to Filey. I spoke, excuse me, to the assembled chambers at Filey Council, and I said, whenever is anybody coming into these chambers asking you to do something, which they'll say that they'll pay for themselves. This is something that should be reflected. This is something that is a great part of this history, of all our histories, and binds us all together, and the people of Filey should know about this. And I'm afraid I was greeted with nothing but blank faces. They were simply not interested. So we realised we had to launch a campaign ourselves, and we did that with my family, with the help of Mike here. We commissioned the plaque, and there it is. It says, this plaque commemorates the 4,000 servicemen from the West Indies and the Caribbean who trained at RAF Humbenby Filey Moor during World War II. In a time of need, they answered the call and came to these shores as volunteers to serve alongside and as part of the forces of the British Commonwealth and her allies. We acknowledge the sacrifice they made together. And that sports the RAF insignia. The RAF excuse me, supported the commissioning of this, so this is now regarded as an official RAF plaque, and goes on their roster, because of course all around the country they have memorials and plaques. But we had nowhere to put it. The best that the Filey Council could say, well, we put it at the old campsite, and this is what it looks like now. And unfortunately, for those who know, it's on a main road, and it's private property. So although when we went to the media and said, well, Filey won't let us do this, and they were saying, oh, we've offered Glen Parsons a place for this, it was private property. They had no authority to offer us that, and in any event, it's a totally unsuitable position, because there are the gates, and that's the main road. And that was me when we took it back up to what would be its place one blustery day, but it's not the right place for it. But we campaigned, and thankfully the people of Filey themselves had the last word. They made it clear that they did want this to be part of their history. And the lady came forward and said, well, I've got a property in Filey, you can put it on there. And of course there was no way that the council could stop that. So I'm delighted to say that on the 1st of April, after nearly 3 years of campaigning, we had the unveiling. And the 1st of April was an important day because it is also the birthday of the RAF. So it was actually its 105th birthday, and we were able to send out a media call across the country to invite what survivors there were of their time in Filey to come. And we managed, and it was a great testament to the can-do spirit, to get people at very short notice from across the country. We managed to get 6 survivors, the youngest of which was 96. the oldest 99. So if you think about it, all of them just a few years younger than the RAF themselves. And there they were, came across the country to make sure that they were there. Some of them, the first time they'd ever been back to Filey since those days. And we heard stories about how they'd come from Caribbean islands, come to Filey, thought, oh, let's go in the sea. And they never went in the sea again, Filey. But it was a great day. And there's Air Commodore Adam Sanson who came to unveil it on behalf of the RAF, and it was indeed a great day. And this gentleman here is Alfred Gardner. We showed you earlier. I'm going to see if I can do this because it's there he is also with Prince Alfred Jakey Jacobs. I'll come back to that gentleman also in a moment. Let's see if I can do this, if I can take us back. So there he is as a young man there on the right. Also one of the passengers on the inaugural voyage of the Empire Windrush. And there he was at Filey. So a piece of living history there, really. Fascinating man to sit down and talk to. And happily still with us as he approaches his 98th birthday. So yes, Prince Albert Jacobs, who came from Solihull, and we only got contact with him in the week, so we were having this on this Saturday, and we heard word of Jakey Jacobs living in Solihull on the Wednesday, and we wanted to see whether we could get him there. And testament to people's will, we managed to. Somebody would pick him up, somebody would drop him at the station, somebody would collect him. He was very happy to come, but sadly his wife, a lovely lady Rose, suffers from dementia, so the two cannot be parted. So we had to make sure we could get both of them there, and we did. But remember I told you about people being denied their medals, and there's this article from the Solihull Observer that it took him 80 years to get his medals, and he's not alone in that. People were simply sent away without their medals, and if they wanted them they had to apply, and a bit like the Windrush scandal that came afterwards, if you didn't have the right documentation, no matter if you had photographs or what have you, you couldn't get your medals, and it took him all that time. This is curiously dated the 19th of June, but I know that he had his medals by the 1st of April, and was proudly sporting them. This is Neil Franklin, MBE, Jack Crawford, Ralph Ottey, and that's the house there on Queen Street, 85 Queen Street. Ironically, 200 yards up the road are the council buildings. So we actually managed to get a location that you can step outside and see the council buildings. And there it is, now a bona fide landmark. But we feel, this is my brother, we feel that there should be something in Filey itself and some recognition, because next month there will be Remembrance Sunday, and it just seems to us totally wrong that there's going to be no remembrance of the Caribbean cohort at the Memorial Gardens next month. And as I said to you, these were people who lived, fought and sometimes died together. How can it be right in 2023 that when we go to remember those fallen heroes?
Excuse me, do you think the council were just initially, when you made your inquiries, do you think the council were just totally ignorant of what had actually happened?
I think they were. I think that was part of it. I think they were concerned that their argument, so much as it ever developed, we never really got to the bottom of why it was, but what they would say officially, because of course it became a media issue, so they had to say something. Firstly, they said to us that it wouldn't be inclusive, if you can work that out. They said, well, We will put a plaque up, but it mustn't mention the Caribbeans, it will just mention all the people that served. And I said, well, you know, you're completely doing again, erasing that important part of history. He said that will not work as far as we're concerned. Then they said, well, there's Polish people who came, and people from other places. Well, what about them? And we said, well, yes, why don't we have a plaque to them as well? There's enough room in Filey for all the plaques. Why don't we do a plaque for all? And they didn't like that logic either. And then after that, they then said, well, the memorial garden, this came very much later on, the memorial gardens are actually only to commemorate people who were from Filey. So they used that, and then I said, well, can I see anything in the council ledgers or minutes? And then I was sent a note of a meeting which took place in the latter part, I think, of last year, where this was ratified. And I said, well, you've actually changed this then, haven't you, since our campaign? Which, I don't know, make your own mind up about that. I mean, I cannot understand it. I can't understand it. And I've sent them articles over the time. I still write to them periodically, asking them whether they would want to meet and talk about this. I send them links to other parts of the country where people are now embracing their links with their black heritage. Not just from the Caribbean. There were American Air Force bases, of course, in this country, in Wales, etc. And there are plaques there and commemorations, and the American servicemen come back over sometimes once a year.
And a lot settled here.
I beg your pardon?
A lot settled here, didn't they?
Yes, yes.
Because of the way race was at that time back
Yes.
in America, especially in the Big South.
Yes, they did. They did indeed, yes.
Glenn, I've read that at your unveiling ceremony, the Mayor of Filey turned up and made a speech saying how the people of Filey had welcomed the Caribbean servicemen. And this is the Mayor of Filey,
Yes.
and yet the council policy is still not to allow you to have the plaque in the memorial gardens.
That's right, yes. She did turn up. There she is there, Councillor Holden Banks. She did not make a speech, though.
Oh.
She declined to make a speech. And in actual fact was asked afterwards. She was approached by a number of people, not at my behest, I may say, but we had thanks to Ros, who arranged the catering, we had a lovely Caribbean meals put on. And everybody was invited to stay, and there was no, I did not want there to be any sort of confrontation atmosphere with her, but several people approached her, just said, well, you know, I think quite politely, just what is the problem? And then she left. That was that. Yeah, very quickly.
Do you have any representation at the National Memorial Arboretum?
No, we
Have you
don't.
tried approaching them?
No, I haven't actually. That's
Because that might be,
Yes.
you know, sort of a national place to recognise.
Yes.
Because I know that individuals can actually approach them and have, because you're saying about funding it yourself,
Yes.
I know that groups have funded their own memorial there.
Yes.
And it might be a way of perhaps, because obviously it wasn't just Filey that
No.
these groups came to.
No.
It might be a way of nationally recognising.
No, that's a good idea. I'll look into
Yeah.
that. No, I hadn't looked into that actually. But yeah, maybe we need to do that. But I do also want it to be a piece of local
Absolutely,
history
yes.
as well. It's important.